Hello, hello, language learners. You know what time it is. It's 2 p.m. in the UK on a Friday, and once again I'm here to do Fluent Friday. I brought myself a cup of tea up to the little Fluent attic because it's actually really cold today, which is quite exciting and lucky because we're getting a bit of natural light coming down here. But that all being said, let's cut to the chase. First of all, don't forget tomorrow we're having a check-in Saturday in the group. So I'll be putting a post up where you can share what you've been doing for your language this week. And I had one of those days yesterday where I thought I hadn't done anything at all. And then thought, oh, better get a move on, do some language learning. And it completely changed my day and really kind of got a sense of productivity that I hadn't had for a few days. So it's really, really good. And all I did was Glossica French, which is an excellent course. So sometimes it's the little things that get us a little bit further. And today, well, let's talk about the little things. The little things of which there are millions. I'm talking about words, of course. Vocabulary. So today I'm going to tell you about vocab learning. I've got a few tips for you. I want to introduce you to kind of a foolproof method of thinking about how you're getting organized in vocabulary learning. And once that's done, I'm also going to show you my own vocabulary system. And this genuinely is an adapted version, sort of a modernized version of what I've been doing since I was in school, since I was little teenage Kirsten learning languages at age 15. And it just works for me, and I really want to share it because many people share their vocab methods, and here we go. All right, so before, as usual, got my reporter notebook. I have two questions to answer as well, from Rian and from Chris. So if you've got a question or you just want to say hello, just leave me a comment down there and I will see them. And it's always really nice to sort of know who's checking in, who's watching. Okay, to the vocab learning. There are two aspects of vocab learning that I want to cover with you before we even start going into details or how does it work or best methods, etc. And there are two really important sentences I want you to remember, rules really. Rule number one of vocabulary learning is to know that your tools don't make the winning method. So by tools, I mean things like flashcards. You could be like the king of Anki, but you could be reading the biggest Anki manual. Somebody could be coming to you with, I've got the winning method. The tools you use though don't necessarily work right for you. They might not suit what often people call a learning style. So we're talking about, there are people who have an audio learning style or an oral learning style who would like to who learn by listening better. There are people who have a visual learning style. It's actually been proven scientifically that nobody really has one learning style and the others don't work. Instead, think of it as a learning preference. But if your tool doesn't really work with you and you don't know how to use it right, say you just kind of come to memorise, take the first course and just follow that course down the line, it's just not going to work for you. So think about it like a photographer. If you are newly all excited about becoming a photographer and you want to develop your amazing photography skills, many people, the first question they ask is, what's the best camera to buy? And that's the same as sort of asking, what's the best pen to buy to learn vocabulary with? So you're already beginning to see the problem. If you don't actually know what you're doing with that pen, you don't actually know what you're doing with that camera. You could spend millions on fantastic language courses, on amazing pens, or on a wonderful camera, and you're still going to be fluent in nothing and taking pictures that kind of look like that. Right? So let's not do that. Let's learn about light. Let's learn about framing if we want to learn photography, and let's learn about vocabulary and learn about learning, so to get a sense of what makes us remember things, get the methods right, get the systems right, and then worry about the tools. So that's point number one. And point number two is just one single sentence, one rule for you, and it's a ground rule that I want you to have for all of your language learning life, and that is be individual. Don't think there is one method out there and you're not doing it, and if you're not doing it, you're going to fail. Because that's not true. The key with vocabulary learning is really that you have to find something that works for you. And that's been the premise of, really, that's one of the core messages of Fluent. It's the core message that goes throughout all of my books, including my vocab learning book that I'll tell you about a little bit later. And it's just a core rule, right? So who are you? What works for you? How do you remember things? And then take it from there. So that's my 2 vocabulary learning rules. Number 1, know what you're going to do with your tools before you spend a load of money or time on them. Number 2, be individual and be proud of how your brain works. And now let's get into the 3 steps of how vocabulary learning works. There are 3 steps that I want to take you through, and really these are not sort of going to teach you a specific method of doing things. These steps teach you a method of thinking about your vocabulary, and I think that is the core. If you get your thinking right, you're going to benefit for years. Okay, so let's start with step 1. 3 steps to this in total, and they are grow, memorize, and review. So step number 1, grow. And by growing your vocabulary, I mean thinking about where you're going to find the words, how they're going to stick, and where you're going to put them when you're finding them. And knowing where to find the words is a very interesting one, because some language learners prefer to learn very rigidly. They sort of really want to work down their way down these what so-called frequency lists. So they just go in and say, okay, I want to learn the 20,000 or 2,000 most frequently mentioned words in German or in Welsh, etc. And this method is actually, you know, this has got, it sounds odd to me, because what you're doing is you're just learning words out of context. You don't necessarily learn what's important to you, and you're sort of pushing your way through something that statistics have generated and not people. And to me, languages are something that, yes, has a scientific side, but it's used by people, and one of those people using the language is going to be you. So I would advise you to be a little bit careful with those lists and take languages from your environment. Now, where can you find them in your environment? And for that, I sort of looked at one of the most recent pages in my vocab book, and I kind of looked through this and I realized I take my words from everywhere, and I think you should do that too. So sources of words can be your reading material. So this, I've shown you this before, is a language learning magazine, and I kind of like having this printed, but of course, how is this different from a website? You know, you could just look at a website on your iPad. There are millions of really good learning pages. So in French, there is the website TV5 Monde, or TV5 Monde. That's a fantastic website where you can find a lot of sort of learner level material. In Germany, this is dominated by Deutsche Welle. Deutsche Welle is awesome for German learners. In Welsh, there is the channel S4C, and yeah, please comment and tell me what language you're learning, and hopefully I'll have a recommendation for you, and if not, I'm going to look one up and research one, or tell me what you're using, you know, for sort of learner level reading content. So reading and watching some videos. Watching videos is not as good because you don't necessarily know what word you are hearing. So if you're going to watch videos, I'll get back to this later, but work with subtitles to make sure that you've actually got the words right. So if you got something like this, you can see here is the article, and then there's a little vocab box with it. So it kind of comes with its own dictionary. And as I use the words, as I think, oh, this is an interesting one, I like this one, it goes on the list. Now, the next sort of thing here is really that I was trying to read this book, which is actually 6 miles above my level. But every time I look up a word in the dictionary, I decide, is this an interesting word? Is this a good word? It goes in here. Some of these words come from the language course. I'm doing the audio course. So if you're doing Glossica, say something in Welsh, say something in Spanish, look in the course notes if there is something that seems useful to you. And again, your grow system is not just where to find them, but also where to put them. So put them all in one place. It doesn't have to be a handwritten list. It can be like a spreadsheet on your computer. It can be post-it notes. It can be, memorise, Anki, whatever you're using. But at the moment, just put it all in one place. And another interesting source of vocab that many people, I think, overlook is that some of these came from a conversation I had with my language exchange partner in Welsh. So even when you're having a simple conversation, or you're just walking around, if you're lucky to be in an environment where your target language is spoken, you will kind of find all these new words. So when you find one, just put it somewhere. That's sort of the key message here, really. So when you're growing your vocab, be targeted. Search for resources they're not too easy. They're just a little bit above your level. They can be a little bit too hard, but not completely impossible. What's the point of that? I have one friend who he's learning Russian and he's doing a history degree, and one of his big challenges, he keeps contacting me and says, Kerstin, how can I read historic 1920s Russian newspaper articles? And this is somebody who has been learning Russian part-time for perhaps a year or two. So there is just a general kind of gap. And what I often say to him is, the answer, unfortunately, is, sit there with a dictionary and invest an awful lot of time, work really hard, because your gap is so big. So think about, where is the gap of your materials? You just want it to be perhaps in something like this, in a line or two. You don't want it to be more than sort of 3 or 4 words that you don't know. Okay, so look for, if you're a beginner, look for something that's for beginners. Easy readers are a great resource. I know Ollie Richards has got a few, and if you're a German learner, Andre Klein, I love all of his work, and he's got lots on Amazon. Okay, so that's the growing. Step number 2, memorizing. Actually, I'm going to keep this up. And there are 2 big techniques that you can use for memorizing words that I really like. I have more that I talk about in the vocab cookbook, which is not about sort of my ideal method, but really was a way for me to research lots of vocab learning methods and share them with you. So if you've got the vocab cookbook, or if you haven't got it yet, get yourself a copy, because it is this sort of overview with recommendation for, this is good for people who, X, Y, and Z. And something that I do when I'm learning vocab is I really, I become this sort of linguist, and I really look at the words. And with most European languages, this word. Now, if you are a student of an East Asian language, or if you're a student of a Native American language, or perhaps Aboriginal, etc., so something that I don't know anything about, please comment and let me know, if this system works as well. But words are very often made up of different aspects, different parts. So for example, in Welsh, you have the word her, H-E-R, looks like her, it's pronounced her. Her. I've been told my R rolling is not good enough, so that's a German for you, so her. That word means challenge. The word for challenging is her-iol, I-O-L. So, and often I see with verbs that they end in io, I-O. So to challenge someone, I don't know, but might just be her-io. So either way, as I am looking through my vocab list and I see little letter connections, perhaps 3 or 4 letters together, and I see them at the start, or kind of always in the middle, always at the end of a word, I get this sense, oh, okay, this is an adjective. Oh, okay, this is one of those. So something that happened to me recently, and I really want to share it because it's such a good illustration, is you see here the word cyfrus, C-Y-F-F-R-O-U-S. And that is a word that I kept staring at, and I'm going, I have no idea how I'm going to memorize this. This is just like, what? But then later on in the vocab list, I came to something called... She's looking for it now. It is cyfnewid. Cyfnewid. And that's C-Y-F, and then the word newid. And I thought, newid? Okay, and that means exchange. So I've got cyfrus, exciting, and cyfnewid, exchange. and I still didn't see it. And then I thought, newid. I know that newid means to change something, which is easy to remember because it sounds a bit like knoweth, which means new, right? So if you change something, there's something new about it. The story started becoming clearer. And as I looked at cyfnewid, X change, and I thought, okay, newid, change, cyf, X. Looked back up to this cyfros word and I thought, exciting, X change. This is a prefix. A prefix is a start that kind of keeps getting reused, like X in English. So you've got exciting, exchange, exonerate, etc. So it starts kind of becoming clearer that all these words have got something in common, which is this sort of English accents that usually means out, right? It comes from Latin meaning out. So my linguistic kind of background, my knowledge of a little bit of Latin, my knowledge of this kind of language connections started kicking in. And this is with a Celtic language. You wouldn't think it had a lot in common, but there we are. And then it happened again on the same page with the word cefn, which means back, right? So cefn means back. Cefnogi is in this list, and that means to support, like to back someone. And earlier on in the list, it has cefndir. Again, I couldn't remember it at all until I recognized the cefn connection, and then it means background. And this happens so much. Trust me, I am a German teacher, and a lot of what I teach in German is just this idea of the prefixes and the suffixes, the little letters at the start of the word. So my absolute tip number one for memorizing your words is, and I apologize for this long excursion into Welsh, I hope you're still awake. My tip number one for memorizing words is to really look at the words. Just look at them a little bit more deeply, and often you will start drawing connections, seeing connections. If you're a learner of Spanish and your native language is English, you're going to see those connections anyway. French learning, you know, languages that are Romance languages, they are Latin based. They connect to English because English is largely Latin based. If you're a German learner, you're also going to start seeing these different connections. So the more you know about where your language came from, especially if the language you're studying is in your own language family or the language family of something that you already knew, the easier it gets. And that's really where being a polyglot comes in handy, because the more languages you know, the more connections you have that you can draw. But even if you're learning your first foreign language, and say it is French or it is Spanish, you've got such an advantage just from knowing English. So don't despair because you're learning your first foreign language, because it's actually the second language in your life. Now, tip number 2, memorization. Everybody loves memorization. Now, memorizing it can be very complicated, and one of my colleagues who I really admire for kind of sticking with this and pulling through it absolutely believes and swears by building the memory palace. Now, I don't go quite as far as the memory palace, but generally I have excellent memory, and one of the reasons I have good memory is because I have a skill of connecting words, but I'm also good with phone numbers, etc. And I have developed for myself a system of word association, number association. So for example, it's really difficult for most people to remember something like, you know, like a string of numbers that is like 1 2 1 6 1 4 8 9 8 1 8 2 8 3, until you start connecting and go, okay, so 1489, okay, that's 2 years before 1492, and then the next number is this, and that's like, you know, so you start telling yourself a little story around it, and that works. Now with words, and if you're trying to remember vocab, there's 2 ways of doing this. Number 1, associate a word with an image, and you don't necessarily have to think, okay, I am learning the word for coffee, I'm going to think of a coffee cup. Be a bit more creative. So think about what the word sounds like. Think about what the word sounds like to you. And in Welsh there is this example that I often tell, and I think it's really good. It is anghysbell. That's the word How on earth is that? That means remote, like far away, far out. How's anyone going to remember that? But then it looks like ANGHYSBELL, so it's got the word bell at the end. And in Memorise, somebody had drawn this connection that helped me, and I'm forever going to remember it. Angrisbech. He lived really far out, so I went there and I rang, like ang, his bell. I rang his bell. So the person did exactly the memorization technique of word association. They thought about, what does this word sound like? How can I connect it with what the word means? He lived really far out, so I rang his bell. I went, drove out there and rang his bell. And they told themselves a tiny little story. If you get this right and you connect what the word sounds like with what the word means, bearing in mind you've done your writing exercises, you know how to pronounce, of course, but presuming you can pronounce the word, that pronunciation is going to then remind you of the word's meaning. So that works extremely well. And number 2 is really sounds. So, you know, like even if there is just a sound, you could go Angrisbech, Angris, hiss, hiss, hiss. He lives far out where the snakes hiss. And then you've again built that memory association. For me, associating images works best. But the association of sound you can build in there as well. If you get the Fluent Guides box set, by the way, there's a really great worksheet in there for you. And if you want, you know, just kind of comment on the Facebook, and I'm going to put this worksheet perhaps in the Facebook group just to let you know how this system works. Okay, so we're on step 2 now. So we've got step 1, grow your vocab. So that is taking it in and putting it somewhere. Number 2 is memorizing it. You could use the linguistic connections, you could use images, you could use sound, you could build yourself a whole memory palace. Again, the idea is really that of a cookbook. Find a recipe that works for you. And then number 3, revise. And this is about building a system that encourages you to have the words come back to you many, many times over. Okay? Repetition. Essentially, repetition just works. You can memorize a word until the cows come home. That's great. But if you then never use it, and using it does count as a repetition of the word, now what's the point? It's just kind of gonna sit in your brain and do what exactly? You know, so we want to use these words. We want to speak, right? Now, the repetition system, it's called spaced repetition very many times, and the reason it's called spaced repetition, the reason spaced repetition works for language learners, is that your memory curve kind of goes like this. You take a word in, and you remember it day 1, day 2, day 3, day 5, 6. Week later, you've forgotten it. This is normal. Many, many times my students tell me, I must be stupid because I still can't remember this word, and you've already told me 3 times. The reason they can't remember this word is usually either because we're in a lesson that's a week later and they haven't repeated it in between, so of course they've forgotten it, or because it just didn't go in the first time right, so they haven't even memorized it. Memorizing can make this stay a little bit more, but ultimately you're going to forget. So the idea of repetition is day 1, day 2, day 3, up, here we go again. You take in the word again. Day 5, again, and then over time this memory curve that looks like this at the start, it doesn't do that anymore. It stays up. That word, it goes into what's called your long-term memory, and it will stay for a long time. So revision, you have to do it in spaced systems, and here is where I'm going to tell you all about my vocab method. My vocab method does build in spaced repetition in the same way that many flashcard systems do automatically, so you don't have to build this, but this really works for me. I write down words as I find them, and then I go through my list and I look at it and go, okay, support, okay. And this is really, the memorization stage involves me staring at these words and wondering how to remember them, and then looking at them again, and then checking what I remember. And then I follow a system that I call write, look, cover, repeat. I write them, I look at them, I cover one side, usually the Welsh side. I go down the list and I check which ones I know. If I don't know one, say after the first or second run through, what I do is it gets a little cross. The colours are meaningless, they just relate to what pen I have in my hand, but you could use colours if you want to track yourself more. the next time through, I will still run through this list once more. And then, if I still can't remember these words, the cross stays and I just leave it. You know, I'm not going to memorize these today. Leave it, come back tomorrow. Now, I'm going to go to the previous vocab system to show you what happens the second time round. So we're returning to this page. It's already had, say, a pink marker. This here has pink highlights. And then I go through it again. And then there will be some words and I still can't remember them. So they might get a green highlight. Again, run through them 2 or 3 times. Green highlight. Hopefully can remember them. Close the book. That's it. I never really revise more than a page in one go, and a page is about 30 to 40 words. Next step, I've run through, I pay attention to all these words equally. So there might be some, you see you've got this one's got a little star here. That might mean I remembered it when I went through and I had a pink marker. I remembered it when I went through and had a green marker, but oh, no, now it started to go. So you see that memory curve in action. And there are some words that just won't stick. So you see this one's got damn wine. Oh, that took me forever to learn. Now I know it. So even if a word is tricky, you will get it eventually. So this word now has a green little star, a pink highlight and a green highlight. That's telling me something. That's telling me for some reason it's just not going in. It's not as easy as imolchva, which means bathroom, and I just learned it the third time round. It's just easier to remember why our brains draw those connections. Is not to do with how good your technique is, it's to do with the magical mysteries of your brain. So, as I then had this word and I still couldn't remember it, what happens is when I'm on the next vocab page, so in between these little vocab pages, excuse me, I just have notes, bit of writing practice, some questions, but then I run through. It goes right up here. So up here you have the word damn wine again. If I still can't remember it and I am on the next spread of pages, I will go back through and I look and see, okay, what's really colourful. The really colourful things, they go right to the top here because they are in the next revision round. Now, if something starts looking like organization will come as I launch my tracker. If something starts looking like this, it's got a highlight, it's got a cross, it's got an exclamation point, it's got tears written next to it. I just can't remember it. So at some point I think, okay, book, I've had it with you, and the book gets closed. I don't go back to the book. I start putting this word in memorise, and there are 2 reasons for this. Number 1, because just writing it and staring at it obviously doesn't seem to work. And number 2, I want to freshen it up in the sense of where else I'm getting it from. So many times I will remember words better because in between vocab sessions I might have seen it in here. I might have watched it on television. It might have come up in a conversation. So words that you use in a conversation, like I said before, it counts as a repetition. And this is why the most common words that you use with your friends, you never forget. And this is also why music works so well, because we tend to listen to songs that we like many, many times. So that's really your revision system, or at least it's my revision system. So I would love to hear from you. Just comment in Facebook and tell me, how do you use spaced repetition? Do you just use flashcards? Do you intersperse your flashcards? One way that I have always loved doing my vocab, I kind of got out of the habit now that I'm an adult, but when I was cramming for exams, for example, this worked a treat forever and ever, and that is using post-it notes. So I just have them on post-its and stick them in the mirror on the bathroom. That really worked well. Or still it works really well if I open my spice cupboard, or I open my cupboard down in the kitchen, just in places where you don't, where you're not in a vocab frame of mind. You see the word and it counts as a repetition. it has been said, and I often kind of hold to this, that a bright student needs to see a word 7 times to remember it. Most average students need to see words between 12 and 15 times to remember them. And a student who is struggling with a word, or if you're struggling with a word like I was with Damwine, you need to see it at least 25 times. See, hear, experience the word to remember it. So don't give up on yourself. You know, if you are struggling to remember lots of words, it might be that you're just trying too many at once and you're losing your sense of how much you actually are remembering. Or it might just be that you need to step up those repeats. But you can't just cram it all in. You need the space between the repetitions. You need to chill. So I hope that this helped. I've got 2 extra questions that I'm going to cover today. Number 1 is the question from Rian, who asked about learning from television shows, and especially learning vocab from TV shows. Now, for me, a TV show is not as much of a source of vocab unless you are willing to pause it. You know, unless you're willing to watch it with subtitles, pause it as a new word comes in, and then write that word down. Again, it's the growing. You have to have a system for growing. If you're not willing to do that, that's fair enough, and that's absolutely okay, because most of us, we watch television to chill out. So instead, what I use television for, what I think is a good use of television, YouTube videos, etc., is really as one of your spaced repetitions. So if you're, especially, it works really well if you're watching something specific on a certain topic. But it works with everything. You know, if you're watching the news, you will get a certain sense of the word in context. So you're getting the word in a natural context. You're getting it in a grammatical usage, so it's not isolated anymore, but you're actually hearing how people use it. And number 3, you are getting the word with subtitles as a repetition. So then you just, if you have that moment when you're watching TV where you're thinking, oh, I recognize that one, I know that one now, then it's working and it's doing exactly what it should. And my second question came from Chris Colson, hi. And that was tips for learning vocabulary from songs. And my first tip is really the same one. If you want to grow your vocabulary through songs, what you need to do is find the song lyrics, pause the songs, and really kind of stop, think about what that word means, almost translate the line and write it down. I have done this with songs that I absolutely love. It has completely cemented words in my head. It absolutely works, but it's a little bit of effort at the start. So it's more hassle than just listening to a song. Just listening will still get you used to the sounds of your target language, but it's not actually going to teach you anything. So you got to do a bit more work than that. And number 2 is really, once you have studied those words, just repeat the song a lot. And I've got a tip for you. There's a website called Lyrics Training. So if you go to Lyrics Training, you can find songs, I think, in 6 or 7 languages. And the system is built so that it automatically pauses the song, makes you listen to a word and type it in. So you don't quite have to do all the effort yourself. There's actually software out there that will do it for you, but that doesn't find necessarily the word that you want. And that's really all that I have for vocab. Now, I do have a big book recommendation for you. I have written a book about vocab learning. It is called The Vocab Cookbook. And because there isn't a printed copy, I thought I'd demonstrate word association for you. This has been a talk about vocab. This is a cookbook. So please go out. It's only $8, and it's really the sum of all the work I have done on vocabulary learning. It guides you through this sense of acquisition, memorization, or growth, memorization, and reviewing. And it is a collection of recipes. So just like in here, I am never going to make myself my own mixed vegetables with sesame seeds. Actually, I might. just like I'm never going to make Savoy cabbage because I hate Savoy cabbage. There will be certain techniques in the book that just aren't right for you, but the whole design of the book is to teach you that that's okay. And my main rule for you really is to be an individual. And with those words, I'm going to leave you. I'm going to wish you a wonderful Fluent Friday, and I'm really looking forward, if you are studying vocab with Memorise, send me a screenshot. If you are a Welsh learner, I'm going to put a link to my own Welsh course in the comments of this video, because I'd love for you to join, you know, compete with me in the Welsh learning. That would be great. And I'd love to see pictures of your own language learning materials. So please comment with pictures, comment with news of what you've been up to. Can't wait to hear from you guys, and thank you for watching.